It's the Draft Fellows coming at you live. Kyle and Andrew breaking down the drive. Prospects to roster, we got the flow. First round picks to the ones you don't know. Talk about the combine, skills on display. Who's rising up and who's falling away. Roster building like a GM in the zone. Kyle, Fellows, Andrew Mertig, they own the phone.
Hey, welcome back to the Draft Fellows podcast. I'm Andrew Mertig. That is Kyle Fellows, and together we are the Draft Fellows. Make sure you're checking us out on YouTube or check out the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Kyle, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I have had a good week, other than the Packers losing their playoff game, which we don't need to talk about. But yeah, we are just jumping full steam into the off season, into draft, and yeah, mock drafts are fun, man. This is the closest thing that we can get to the draft until we get there, and so it helps us get a flavor for what's coming down the line as we get closer to the draft.
Yeah, let me say one thing before we jump into this, and that is, if you aren't checking out our non-mock draft stuff, please do. It's really easy if you're watching on YouTube to subscribe. You're listening on the audio platform. Please, if you like the mock draft part of it, you may like some of the other content, even though it's not labeled mock draft. We just did a really, really cool quarterback matchmaking show earlier this week. So
Fun show.
If you want to know, if your team is even in the possible market for a quarterback in the next year or 2 or 3, we probably talked about it. And that was really cool. And in a way, very related to the mock draft. So check that out if you get a chance. But no further waiting. We're going to jump into, I think this is my 5th mock draft of 2025, and I'm going to get Kyle's reaction to where I went with each of the picks. There was one team that was highly controversial in mock draft 4.0, so hope I don't anger their fans again, but if I do, whatever. Anyways, kicking things off, this is a little chalk at the top, but I do have the Tennessee Titans going with Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback out of Colorado, and then the Cleveland Browns taking Cam Ward, the quarterback out of Miami. I think since the draft order is set, those two seem to be at the top. Which order you put them in, probably which flavor of ice cream you prefer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the really, you said chalk, but I think that the takeaway here is that, like, really, it feels like these quarterbacks, and then Travis Hunter, who we're going to talk about here in a second, it kind of feels like that's going to happen in some order. Now, the cool thing is about the draft is, like, everything does change. Like, we think that we know in January, but we don't. Like, things are going to change. Things are going to shift. We're going to be surprised. Players that we're talking about at the bottom of this top 10, players that we're not even talking about on this first page, could kind of start to flirt with these top picks. But right now, consensus is it's Sanders, Ward, Hunter are kind of dominating the conversations. It's just going to be fascinating to see how that kind of morphs as we get further into the process.
Yeah, and I had Shedeur Sanders to the Titans because I do think that's a little bit better of a scheme fit with the Callahan system. I don't know if the influence of the agent and Shedeur's dad are going to have anything to do with that. Certainly, if Dion is sniffing around NFL head coaching jobs, that will also be a factor in this conversation. But for right now, I think that's a good fit. I think for Cleveland, getting a player like Cam Ward that they could develop and then potentially, sit behind Jameis Winston for a little bit of the season and let him loose into a very talented team seems like a good option. At number 3, I have the New York Giants taking Travis Hunter, the cornerback / wide receiver / athlete out of Colorado. Aforementioned, the Giants fans were not happy with the Ashton Genty pick at number 4 in the last mock draft, so hopefully they like Travis Hunter a little bit better. And then at number 4, I have the New England Patriots taking Edge Abdul Carter out of Penn State. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so Abdul Carter is like a great player, and what's so fascinating here is I feel like as a Drake May fan and as a Drake May Dynasty Fantasy owner, like, I want the man to get some offensive line help now. And it would be kind of upsetting if they didn't do that. But I think the realistic conversation is that they just hired Vrabel to be their head coach. And this is a defense guy. And the Patriots have kind of been a defense organization that obviously they've had a lot of offensive talent over the years, but they've prided themselves on having that talented defense. So I don't think it would be crazy to think that like at the top of the board, he comes in and kind of looks and says, okay, like maybe the value isn't there at offensive line, which it kind of feels like maybe that might be the case, and says, we know that Carter is a stud. Like, let's just bring him into the building and figure out the rest. Maybe the offensive line is through free agency or whatever. But at first I saw this and I was like, no, give him the offensive line. And then I was like, I can totally see it when you factor in the Vrabel head coaching gig there.
Yeah, so it's interesting because the Patriots have the most cap room projected going into the offseason of any team in the league. And we know offensive linemen traditionally are not available in free agency, at least not impact offensive linemen. So we'll see if they're able to address their needs in that capacity, or if they can find other ways to sort of get that fixed. Obviously, that needs to be priority one with Drake May. But Abdul Carter looks like an absolute force, and I know that Mike Vrabel would really love that. And number 5, of the Jacksonville Jaguars taking defensive lineman Mason Graham out of Michigan. The Raiders at 6 taking cornerback Will Johnson, also out of Michigan. And then the Jets at number 7 taking our first offensive lineman tackle Will Campbell out of LSU. Any reaction to those 3?
Yeah, I think what sticks out to me here is just the Will Johnson pick at 6, because we talked in previous mock drafts and other conversations that Will Johnson is probably better than the 6th overall pick in a lot of drafts, but corners just have a hard time ascending to the top of a draft just because of, I think that they're probably considered a premium position for a lot of people, but at the same time, maybe not like the premium of premium positions, if that makes sense. And so since you've got a guy like Travis Hunter, who is kind of like otherworldly in the fact that he can play offense and defense and is so talented at corner in his own right, Will Johnson could be this guy that's just a super value where he goes. Like, even at a place like 6, normally you probably aren't picking Will Johnson at 6. Obviously, the injury is going to play a factor there, and teams are going to have to vet that. But I think this is something we kind of saw maybe happening earlier. Now in this, I like that you have it in this simulation where he falls down the board just a little bit and becomes a value.
Yeah, and then at number 8, the Carolina Panthers take Texas A&M edge Shamar Stewart. At number 9, the New Orleans Saints take wide receiver Tetairoa McMillan. And then at number 10, the Chicago Bears take offensive tackle Josh Simmons out of Ohio State.
Okay, the one here that I have to kind of, as a confession, just say is the Tetairoa McMillan pick. This is the player that I do not want to like, because we all have our type, right? And for me, I never fall for the big, clunky, tall, thick wide receiver, the big possession guy. It's not my type. There's been some really good ones over the years, but I usually just steer clear and just don't naturally gravitate towards those guys. But I watched him this week and I was like, I think this guy might be really good. And like, I know that that's like, it may be arrogant to say that like I had to come in and give that stamp of approval, but for me to come in not wanting to like a player to coming out on the other side and being like, damn, this guy does some really nice things, it usually is kind of the confirmation that you were wrong about your assumption about that player. Really gifted athlete, just makes things look super, super easy. A lot of people have thrown out the Mike Evans comparison, and I think it's important to say that like Mike Evans is a one of one. And I think Mike Evans has done way more than his profile suggested. Like, a lot of people thought like there were going to be limitations here. He's just going to be that big possession guy. Mike has had an incredible career. But even if you don't want to put the Mike Evans name on it, like T. Higgins, Drake London is the one that I really like. But when you watch Drake London, which I did, put him up and next to McMillan, I think that McMillan is a much more fluid athlete than Drake London.
Interesting.
And so for me, like, this is a player that like in this class where we're lacking some superstars on the offensive side of the football, I'm going to spend some more time here because like I'm afraid to really like this player as much as I'm saying that I do. But I'm not afraid to say that this is a top 10, top 15 player in this class. And I think you putting him here to the Saints makes a ton of sense because of all the questions that the Saints have right now. Obviously, you want to believe that Chris Olave is going to be a long-term part of that offense. And I loved Chris Olave coming out, but this is a totally different kind of player and a player that can probably just be fed the football no matter what that offense looks like for the next couple of years. So I love the fit, and I'm starting to like the player a lot.
Yeah, with Olave maybe a little bit more questionable than we would have anticipated. Rashid Shaheed coming back from an injury, I do think the fit makes sense. McMillan is interesting because I'm like you. I don't want to like these kind of players, and I think it's you and I have been through this process, and I want to say from like 2015 to 2020, there was this rash, like this huge swath of wide receivers that didn't separate well. And we would always get really excited about them because they were big and they seemed athletic, but they were very linear. And they would slide way further in the draft than we thought, or they would be massive busts. And, I kind of call this like the N'Keal Harry factor. And as a result, like I still to this day don't like T. Higgins as a player. And like I can't explain it to you. When I watched him, I was traumatized from all of those past players and I couldn't like him. And I think that's where I'm at with T-Mac is like he seems like a T. Higgins player. And we know that T. Higgins has proven his worth in the league. Now, maybe Tetairoa McMillan is more of a Mike Williams kind of player. And people forget how good Mike Williams was pre-injuries. But like maybe that's kind of that mid ground. And like maybe he's not quite Drake London or T. Higgins, but I still think that there's a ton of value there. He can be a really, really impact player. Shamar Stewart, I just want to shout out. Maybe this is a little high as his perceived value, but this is a guy who is doing things as a edge player at like 280, 285 that like don't make sense at that size. Like some of the more slight edges would be like maybe a tenth of a second faster in the 40 or a little bit faster in the short shuttle, but he's doing that size, and I just feel like you can also kick him inside. He's going to be so valuable when he gets into the testing. Like this is a guy whose RAS should be through the roof. I think he's going to shoot up draft boards, would be a really good fit in Carolina. And then Josh Simmons, I think might be the best tackle in this class, but missed most of the season with injuries, missed most of Ohio State's marquee matchups. And so as a result, probably going to get dinged a little bit, not going to be able to compete in a lot of the athletic testing. But I do think he is a top-notch player. San Diego State transfer to Ohio State. He was at SDSU in 2022, so I'm pretty familiar with his game. But kicked outside, looked really, really smooth, very confident. His technique seems to have improved, so good on the Ohio State coaching staff. I think that's exactly what the Bears need to help out Caleb Williams. And we're going to flip over. Ooh, I included Josh Simmons twice. I like that pick so much. So pick 11, the San Francisco 49ers take tackle Josh Connerly Jr. out of Oregon. The Dallas Cowboys take Kelvin Banks Jr. Keep him in Texas. The Longhorn goes to the Cowboys at 12. At pick 13, Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia, to the Dolphins. Any of those you want to hit?
Yeah, and so for the people who are listening on the podcast version, Andrew has these really cool graphics that he puts up throughout the show, and he duplicated Josh Simmons on 2 different pages. So that's what you're missing. So if you're only listening to the audio version, head over and check out the YouTube version as well, because there's some cool things that help you kind of see all the things that we can't necessarily talk about in each show. But yeah, so here in this, there's a run here. And of course, Will Campbell happened at 7, a little bit higher in the order. But Josh Simmons has gotten all the love. We keep talking about him, but Josh Connerly Jr. there, the Oregon tackle, Kelvin Banks. This is a run here of 4 tackles in the span of about 5 picks or so. And I just think it's going to be interesting because this is a tackle class that kind of got a lot of hate. I think a lot of people love the tackle class from last year. We've talked about this on some other shows that like it's just going to be really interesting to see who ascends through this process, because it feels like there's a group of these guys who are all kind of graded really similarly. And you see that reflected here with them going to Chicago, San Francisco, Dallas kind of consecutively. Is one of these guys going to vault throughout the process? Is the athletic testing going to do that? Kelvin Banks seems to be the guy that people think could go top 5 or could go in the 20s somewhere. So the tackle class in general is just going to be fascinating to watch because the NFL needs the talent. But is this class, does it justify taking these guys as early as you have them here? Because I love that you have them in this mock, in this place, because I think that the need is there in those spots. Will the NFL reach, or will these players throughout the process justify their stock to the place where this is not a reach anymore? These are just the talented players that the NFL needs.
Yeah, and this was a combination. I mean, there's just so many teams that need tackles from like pick 4 through the late teens, and then
Mhm.
obviously teams in the 20s would love a good tackle to follow them. Anyways, I am liking this tackle class more as we get deeper into it. I think Connerly is somebody who has shot up my boards. I'm much more comfortable with Josh Simmons. I think he probably could be the OT one when it all is said and done. Maybe teams don't like that he's not available for the draft process, but I think you look at his tape and it's pretty
Yeah.
self-assured. And then, Will Campbell, we just don't talk about him very much, but it's like he's really, really good. Even if you think he's a guard, he's really, really
Really good.
good.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. Like, if you're a team that needs both a guard and a tackle, well, you take them, you let them fail at tackle,
Yeah.
and then you kick them inside if you have to. But I think good value there. A little bit of a change for this mock draft. We have a new tight end 1, and that's going to be Tyler Warren out of Penn State, going to the Indianapolis Colts at 14. I have Michael Williams, the edge out of Georgia, going to the Falcons for probably like the 3rd out of 5 mock drafts. Just seems to be a good fit. Stayed in Georgia. The Arizona Cardinals at 16 take Kenneth Grant, the defensive lineman from Michigan. The Bengals take another defensive lineman, Walter Nolan, out of Ole Miss at 17, and the Seahawks take edge James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee at 18.
Yeah, so I guess the ones that stick out to me here are Tyler Warren. That you mentioned that he's flopped as the tight end 1 in this scenario, and I haven't watched Warren back to back with the Michigan tight end Colson Loveland just to see how good players, but it'll be interesting to see how they stack. But I've seen both guys top 15, and I've seen both guys outside the top 32. So that one's going to just be interesting to track. But I like the placement there with the Colts, just trying to figure out. They've got to figure out, is Richardson the guy, giving him a different kind of weapon in that offense, I feel like would be maybe helpful for his development. And then Kenneth Grant going to the Arizona Cardinals at 16. This is one that I feel like could be just kind of a projection of how things may play out, because Mason Graham going at 5, it's unlikely that I think that 2 guys who, not that Kenneth Grant is only a space eater, but a lot of those guys who are just big run pluggers, we don't see them go maybe as high as their talent suggests that they're worth, just because of the role that they play. And I do think that Kenneth Grant is going to be a player that NFL's teams have to decide, can he ascend into a guy who affects the passing game a little bit more than he did in college? And I think we'll see a little bit more of a discrepancy between where Mason Graham goes and where Kenneth Grant goes when we get to the draft. And I think that that's reflected here with Grant going in the mid-teens.
Yeah, and I think Warren maybe a little bit better scheme fit, with the hardcore running game, maybe more of an inline player than Loveland. Just wanted to try switching it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Warren's gotten a ton of buzz based on his performance in the college football playoff and kind of that late season stretch as well. At pick 19, the Denver Broncos go with Georgia linebacker / edge player Jalen Walker. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 20 take Texas A&M edge Nick Scorton. The Pittsburgh Steelers at 21 take cornerback Siobhan Revel out of East Carolina. And at 22, the LA Rams take another cornerback, this time Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame.
Yeah, so the corners here are interesting. We get a couple of talented defensive backs here to the Steelers and the Rams. And I think the interesting thing is going to be that these are 2 guys back to back where the medicals are going to be huge for them throughout the process. And I think that's kind of a theme in this draft class. There's a lot of guys who seem to be really talented players, but probably we won't get testing on just because of their, the way that their season ended. And that's unfortunate. But Revel, of course, with the ACL, Morrison has the hip injury. And so I think that this is going to be an interesting range, because typically in a draft class, you're looking at, 15 to 19 first round grades, probably typically in a class. And so you're sitting here in the early 20s and you're looking at players who may have gone a little bit higher, but those injuries are probably going to sink their stock just enough to where these teams that are playoff contenders have a chance to snatch up guys that they're hoping are healthy and able to contribute in a way that maybe some other guys they have graded lower on their board would. So 2 names that I think will be really interesting, of obviously Revel being 6'3", super lanky. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are just kind of drooling at the opportunity to get their hands on a player who, if he hits, could be a pretty impact player there. So I like those fits with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the LA Rams.
Yeah, and like Jalen Walker seems like such a Denver Broncos pick. They love those like super athletic guys that can do a little bit of everything, and that is certainly in vogue with the performances of players like Zach Bond and Andrew Van Ginkel. Nick Skelton seems to be that heavy edge that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just can't seem to quit. Revel in Pittsburgh, like he's 6'2", 6'3", super athletic. You put him opposite Joey Porter Jr., I'm not sure
Great
that
combo.
teams are going to be able to get their wide receivers off the line of scrimmage. And then Morrison, the thing about him is he's like the ultimate technician, and the Rams don't care what your testing is. Like they just don't care. They want great tape. And Morrison has just about as good a tape as you're going to see from a college corner. Now, what would he run if he was healthy? I don't know. But maybe that doesn't matter to LA, who seemed perfectly content to take Puka Nacua with his 40 time. They seem perfectly content to take Cameron Kitchens with his 40 times. So,
great point. Yeah.
You know, I don't think the Rams care. Let's flip over to the last 10 picks here. And the Chargers at 23 are going to take Ashton Genty, the running back out of Boise State. The Packers take edge Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State. The Houston Texans take wide receiver Alec Iomanor out of Stanford. And then the Washington Commanders are going to take Missouri wide receiver Luther Burden III.
All right, so right out of the gate, I have to apologize to all the good people last week when we did the mock draft who got mad at me for saying Ashton Genty. And I know it's Genty, but when I see it on the screen in the doc, it says it's that A. It gets me every time. So Ashton Genty, getting it right for everybody at home who is upset about that. Love this pick, Andrew, and it's just not fair to give this kind of a player to someone like Jim Harbaugh. And I think that would be a lot of fun to watch. I think it would be really hard for teams in that division to deal with on a regular basis because of how much of a workload he probably would get. But love that landing spot. I like the different scenario here where we had him going top 10, I think flirted top 5 in your last mock, and then slipping down positional value here to 23. Would be super interesting to see like what is his real range and what an NFL team's value there. I haven't done the deep dive on Jack Sawyer, so even though he's the Packers pick here, other than what I saw in the playoffs and a little bit throughout the season, don't know a ton about that player. But I want to hear you just share your love for this Stanford wide receiver, because I know you love, and I don't even know how to say the last name, so I'm going to let you do it.
It's Iomanor.
Iomanor. All right.
I had to look up the pronunciation online, so correct me if you want, but that's what it said. So to me, he's the wide receiver 1 in the class right now. I like him so much. He is like a butt kicker at wide receiver. He is going to block his tail off and really, really make an impact. And when you think about teams that you can't let get this guy, as fans of an NFC rival, right? You can't let the Detroit Lions touch this guy. You can't let the 49ers get this guy. You can't let the Rams get this guy. But Texans head coach, right? Big 49ers connection. Wide receivers that can block are going to open up your run game. But over and above that, this is a guy with track speed. He is super intelligent. He is a super hard worker. You see defensive backs trying to fist fight him during the game because he blocks so ferociously. He's going to put things on every single play he's out there. And you better be ready for a fight if you're a corner, or you're going to get pushed into the sidelines. And so I love everything he brings. I think for this Houston Texans team, we don't know if Stephon Diggs is going to be back. Kind of doubt it. We have no idea what the recovery timeline on Tank Dell is going to be. So you put him opposite of Nico Collins, and I think you really have something cooking there. So I love that fit. Even though I think a lot of people might have Luther Burden ahead of him, he's a super explosive playmaker, and I think he fits in really, really well with what the Washington Commanders have going on as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into his tape, and I'm just starting into Luther Burden because I thought he was next on my wide receiver priority list. but it sounds like maybe I should flip those around and check out the Stanford wide receiver instead. But let's keep going through this. Speaking of Luther Burden, let's go a little further.
Yeah, so he was at 26, the Washington Commanders. At 27, the Baltimore Ravens take defensive back Jahdae Barron out of Texas. At 28, the Vikings take Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. The Buffalo Bills at 29 take Jihad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama. At 30, the Eagles take edge Donovan Azuruka out of Boston College. The Chiefs take tackle Cameron Williams out of Texas at 31. And then at 32, the Detroit Lions take Michigan tight end Colston Loveland.
Okay, so I got a few here, and Jahdae Barron for the Ravens here feels like a Ravens pick to me, because he is the one right now that I can't quite figure out, just because the story on him in 2022-23 was he's a good player, really good player, but 2024 he's been a great player. And so, but he was a slot player in those first 2 years. And now that he's kind of got a little bit more versatility, he's played outside, he's played all around that secondary, he's played near the line, he's played, he's a tackler, like probably one of the better tackling corners in this class, or that we've seen in previous classes. But where do you play him full time? And that's one of those things that teams get caught up on, and players stripped a little bit because we don't know quite what to do with him. But because it's a Ravens pick, the Ravens just tend to take good football players and figure out the rest later. And so I love the fit here. I'm really curious to see how Barron's stock goes, and probably his testing too, because if he has long speed, then I think that some of those questions are dissipated a little bit, but we'll see how that goes. But love the fit there. Love the player out of Texas there, and Barron. And then Izuruku, I can't say it. Izuruku.
I believe it's Azuruku.
Azaraku. Yeah, however it is. Donovan. We'll just call him Donovan. The Boston College freak athlete edge rusher, Izaraku. I'm going to try that one again. He's a player that's really intriguing to me. And again, Eagles, I feel like snatching him up here at the end makes a ton of sense. Just a great athlete there at 6'2". A little bit light, but he's a player that I think that it sounds like I'm going to fall in love with throughout the process as I get into him a little bit more. And the Eagles grabbing him there would be another value pick probably. And then Colston Loveland, I don't understand this one, Andrew. You're going to have to explain this one to me, because it seems like the Lions have a tight end. Why would you go Colston Loveland with maybe some other needs that the Lions have here, looking like they won the Super Bowl in this scenario? Like, why is Colston Loveland the selection?
I'm going to go through a bunch of picks here, and then I will finish with Loveland.
Fine.
Barron, obviously the Ravens have one of the best slot corners in the league in Marlon Humphrey, but he can play all over, and so can Barron. And the Ravens have a little bit of a need at safety quietly. They can also move some guys around to play outside. I think Barron is exactly like you mentioned, the kind of player Baltimore would typically pick. I think the Vikings definitely need defensive line help. Tyleik Williams is a really, really good fit there. Jihad Campbell is probably going to get the most hate out of anybody that I have in the first round. He's currently my linebacker one. I don't think that's going to stick throughout the process. But the Bills have a big need at linebacker. I think they could do a lot worse than Campbell. Maybe he's more of a day 2 pick, but I think, given the need and the fact that there aren't going to be 20 first-round grades in this class, I don't think that's a bad one at all. Azuruko, actually, when you were talking about his build, reminded me a lot of Brandon Graham. So interesting Philly connection there.
Sure. Yeah.
And then, we have Cameron Williams. I think he's going to be a really, really solid right tackle. And I think the Chiefs would love to get a starting offensive lineman at 31. But Loveland is interesting, right? Because you have Sam Laporta. It seems like Brock Wright's pretty solidly entrenched as their number 2. We don't know what's going to happen with the Lions offensive coordinator, but man, how good would that team be if they could get into 2 tight end personnel and with Gibbs and or Montgomery and be able to throw 2 tight ends out there, both of whom can stretch the field. And I think, really make an impact. The Lions have said, we don't care about positional value. We don't particularly care about need as it's perceived. We just want the best football players. And I think Colston Loveland at 32 is a slam dunk pick. Yeah. I would hate this because let's stop giving that offense weapons. as an NFC North rival, but I do think that would be fun. Is it a need? No, not even close. But could they do some really, really intriguing things, especially if Ben Johnson is back? Oh my gosh, that would be a headache.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be fascinating to see, do the Lions feel the need to compensate for a loss of Ben Johnson? I think we're assuming that one way or another he's probably leaving. But do they think that their personnel needs a little bit of an injection because of that potential loss in the creativity, and what do they do there? I think it's going to be really fascinating. Like you said, 12 personnel, just, getting a healthy Montgomery, like the ball in 12 personnel, and then being able to play off that to those tight ends would be a nightmare in a lot of ways. But it's going to be interesting. What's going to be also really interesting is as the rest of the playoffs play out and we get to figure out the order of this mock draft, and that's going to make our conversations even more fun. So next week, we've got a couple of cool show concepts coming your way over the next 2 weeks. We're also going to drop probably a couple more mock drafts to you in the next couple of weeks as well. So want to encourage you to stick with us throughout the process. We are just really closing in on the draft here. It's only a few months away, which is crazy. We're getting into peak draft season. So thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for joining us for this show. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show. But from the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellows have got you covered. So until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.
Kyle got the insight, Andrew brings the heat. Breaking down the roster every single week. Catch us on the podcast, we coming through your speakers. Top picks for practice squad, we got the seekers. Team dynamics, contracts, and the trades. From the draft day excitement to the accolades. Draft Fellows on the track, we gone strong. Analyze the plays, we can't be wrong. From the 40-yard dash to the longest throw. We talking pro ball, yeah, you know.